Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the searing stillness of ancient Persia, specifically the dusty, sun-hardened alleyways of Yazd. It's the kind of heat that wraps around your ankles like a lazy cat and then crawls up your back until even your thoughts start to sweat. You're wearing linen, but it may as well be wool. The wind is more suggestion than substance, carrying nothing but dry whispers and the faint scent of dust, baking on clay roofs. You pull your water pouch from your side. Lukewarm. Of course. This isn't your first time in the desert, but it's the first time you've genuinely started to wonder whether you might dissolve before noon. There's a kind of silence in places like this, deep, pressed-down silence that feels ancient. Even the birds don't flap unnecessarily. You're trudging past adobe walls, their mud brick surfaces crumbling softly at the edges, when you hear a quiet laugh behind you. It's not mocking, just amused. You turn. An older man, skin like polished leather and eyes like slits of clever moonlight, gestures for you to follow. You've got no better plan. He leads you through an arched doorway into a shaded courtyard, and suddenly the heat pauses. Just a second, but enough to notice. The air changes. You're handed something. A small ceramic bowl. You squint down. It's ice. In the desert. More specifically, it's what appears to be some kind of frozen fruit. Pale pink, crystalline, flecked with crushed herbs. You look up. The old man nods as if to say, "Yes, this is normal." You take a cautious bite, and your mouth floods with cold. Real, aching, brain-freezing cold. Your teeth zing. Your tongue protests. And yet, you feel the beginning of something rare in this heat. Relief. Your brain, however, is still rebooting. Ice, in Persia, in a place that hasn't seen a snowflake in months. You mutter something like, "How?" But the man is already walking away again, sandals flapping. You follow, and that's when you see it. Rising just beyond the courtyard, past a stretch of cracked earth and sun-tired shrubs, stands something like a dome, but taller and sharper. Beehive-shaped, its outer surface glows slightly golden under the late sun. It's not a temple, it's not a kiln, it's something else. You blink, trying to place it. The man stops beside you and points toward the structure. "Yakchal," he says. You blink again. The word means ice pit, and you will soon learn that this is the ancient Persian version of a refrigerator. If refrigerators were massive, architectural marvels made of mud, clay, ash, lime, and mathematical brilliance. It looks oddly elegant against the horizon. The way its form rises from the desert like it's always been there. The surface is rough but symmetrical. A narrow chimney-like opening crowns the top. If you didn't know better, you might mistake it for a giant clay oven, or perhaps a particularly well-designed termite mound. But no, it holds ice. And not just ice. It holds a worldview. You begin walking again, pulled by curiosity more than comfort now. As you draw nearer, the air seems to change again, slightly cooler, subtly less hostile. You pass a shallow pool, dry at the moment, but lined with a slight basin that suggests it had a very specific job in another season. The ground around it is carefully sloped, as if guiding water, or more importantly, guiding cold. You squint upward at the top of the dome. There are slits. Ventilation channels, maybe? They seem positioned with intention. Nothing here feels accidental, and everything breathes planning. You glance back at your ceramic bowl, now dripping slightly. "How does it work?" you ask, but no one answers. You suspect you'll have to figure that out the long way. Still, the yakshal hums in silence. A quiet challenge. It dares you to imagine that survival in this heat doesn't just require endurance, it requires cleverness, geometry, community, and a deep, almost spiritual commitment to beating the sun at its own game. Historians still argue whether these massive structures were truly accessible to the average person, or reserved for elites and their mango sorbets. Yes, that's a thing. But one thing is certain. They existed. They worked, and they were built before electricity even dreamed of existing. There's something thrilling about that. Or maybe that's just the sugar kicking in. Either way, you're hooked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a hammock in Greece or a subway in Montreal, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where we're dreaming from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet crunch softly on the sand as you step closer to the yachtshell. Its shadow stretches across the dust like a protective hand. The old man is gone now, or perhaps waiting somewhere inside. You place your hand gently on the cool clay. Let's see what secrets it's kept frozen. You take a tentative step toward the arched entrance of the yachtshell. Your bowl of icy fruit nearly melted now, its last shards clinking against ceramic like wind chimes made of frost. The moment you cross the threshold, you feel it. Not just cooler air, but silence. The kind of thick, expectant quiet that wraps around you like a wool shawl dunked in shadow. The transition is sharp. Outside, desert shimmer, blistered walls, and the constant sound of sun pressing itself into the landscape. Inside, stone, shade, and a strange sense that you've just walked into something sacred. Or maybe just smart. The inner walls of the yachtshell curve upward, disappearing into shadow like the inside of a giant conch shell. The air smells faintly of lime, dust, and something you can't place. Perhaps the memory of cold itself. The architecture feels deliberate. Not decorative, but wise. You step carefully, shoes crunching faintly against the packed earth. The ground slopes downward in a spiral, drawing you deeper. This is the moment you realize it's not just about storing ice. It's about making it. The real magic of the yachtshell isn't just that it keeps things cold, though that's impressive enough when your outside environment feels like it could roast dates on the pavement. It's that these ancient engineers figured out how to create ice in the middle of a place that barely remembers winter. The old man reappears from a side alcove, holding what looks like a dusty wooden tray. He lays it down near a long, shallow depression in the floor. "This," he says softly, "was where the ice first formed." You blink. "In this place?" "Yes, in winter. Cold nights, water laid here, ice by morning." You kneel and touch the ground. It's cool. Not cold like your freezer back home, but in a desert like this, cool is practically miraculous. This shallow channel acted like a giant ice tray. They would pour in water during the coldest nights of the year, just enough for a thin layer to form. The high walls shielded it from the sun, and the cold desert nights did the rest. In the morning, they'd scrape off the fragile sheet and begin again. Layer by layer, night after night. You frown, doing the math. That must have taken weeks. The man nods as if hearing your thoughts. It was not fast, he agrees. But it worked, and it fed many. That's the part modern minds often forget. Time. No one here expected instant results. No one looked at the first thin sheet of ice and scoffed at its inadequacy. They knew it would build. They trusted the process. Honestly, it's kind of inspiring. You stand and continue down the spiral. The walls here are thick, some nearly 2 meters, and made of a mixture called sarouge, a blend of sand, clay, ash, egg whites, and goat hair. Yes, goat hair. It sounds like a recipe made by a sleep-deprived baker, but the result? Waterproof, heat-resistant insulation that has stood for centuries. Historians still argue whether sarouge was perfected through science or superstition. Did they test ingredients like chemists, or just keep tossing stuff into the mix until the walls stopped sweating? Either way, it worked, and that's what mattered. You reach the lowest chamber where it's actually cold enough to make you shiver slightly. This is where they stored the ice, collected in blocks, layered with straw or sawdust, and stacked carefully. The air is heavy still. You can imagine it full once with the gleam of translucent bricks, and the hushed movement of workers preserving each precious flake. A quirky fact? Some yakchals even stored fruit. Figs, melons, grapes, nestled between ice blocks for nobles' summer banquets. Because nothing says, "I'm wealthier than you," like chilled melon in July. You brush your fingers along the wall. The condensation is faint, but present. And the deeper truth settles in. This wasn't just about comfort. This was about life. A cool drink could prevent heat stroke. A chilled compress could reduce fever. And ice in its purest form was preservation. Suddenly you notice a small hole near the base of the chamber. The man points. "For drainage," he explains. Ice melts, water flows, but must go somewhere. Of course, no detail left unconsidered. The yakchal isn't just its storage, it's a closed-loop system. Meltwater escapes through underground channels. The structure breathes through vents and slopes. It's not just functional, it's alive. Outside, the sun is probably still baking the land, unaware that deep beneath its glare, cold survives. You imagine someone long ago pulling a chunk of ice from this chamber and walking it across town to an expecting bride. Or to an ailing elder. Or maybe just to a child who had never known the taste of something colder than air. You sit on a ledge and breathe slowly. This place, this improbable ice sanctuary, was built without electricity, without steel, without blueprints. Just observation, patience, and a deep respect for what nature could do, if nudged gently. You look up toward the vented dome, where faint beams of light filter in like strands of golden thread. You wonder how many generations have stood here. How many wondered the same things? How many left with more than just ice? Maybe it's not just about cold after all. Maybe it's about care. About making sure something fleeting can last, if you build the right shelter for it. You follow the old man out of the yakchal, the brightness outside stinging your eyes like citrus after shadow. It takes a second to adjust, but when you do, something has shifted. The yakchal looms behind you like a secret kept well. Ahead, a new path unfurls. Narrow, gravelly, leading toward a grove of tamarisk trees, and beyond them, another structure. It doesn't have the beehive shape, but it hums with purpose. The man gestures toward it with a simple flick of the wrist. "This," he says, "is where we make the ice." You arch an eyebrow. "Didn't you just cover that?" He shakes his head gently as if to say, "No, child. That was the storage. This is where the real choreography begins." You're led to a wide, flat basin, a rectangular sunken area ringed by a low mud brick wall. It's dry now, but the faint imprint of water remains like the ghost of winter past. Above it stretches a long mud ramp, the kind of thing that could easily support a line of camels or water haulers trudging in single file. And at the far end, an open gate where the desert wind whispers in. "So," you murmur to yourself in the stage. Because that's what it looks like. A frozen theater floor in waiting. The old man nods. At night, he says, we flood it. You imagine it. A team of workers in thick robes moving under the moonlight, buckets and troughs in hand, pouring water into the shallow pool. The stars above them scattered like rock salt. The air cold enough to nip, but not bite. Just still. This is where ice is born. Not deep underground, but right here, out in the open when the desert decides to act like the Arctic for a few hours. The trick? Desert nights. A common misconception is that deserts are always blazing hot. But in winter, without cloud cover to trap heat, the temperature can plummet faster than a dropped amphora. Ancient Persians knew this, counted on it even. And so, every winter night, they'd let the water spread, just a thin film, never deep, across this flat expanse. By dawn, it had stiffened into glass. Then came the scraping. Carefully, silently, they'd collect it, layer it in baskets, or drag it toward the yakchal. Then again, and again. Until a stack became a wall, a wall became a block. A block became security for the blistering months to come. Historians still argue whether this was a centralized city-sponsored affair or managed family by family. Did you need a license to make ice? Did neighbors take turns? Or was there a secret ice guild enforcing water ration etiquette with passive-aggressive glances? You sit on the edge of the basin and imagine the labor. The wet robes. The chilled fingers. The thrill of cracking the first surface. The disaster of an early sunrise melting your night's work. And yet, they did it. Again and again. The old man brings over a small plank of wood with a carved hook on one end, like a baker's peel met a shepherd's crook. Used for lifting edge, he says. You can picture it, slipping the hook under the frozen sheet, prying it loose like a delicate pastry. It's not brute strength that made ice work here, it's finesse. A fringe theory even suggests that some Yakshal engineers experimented with mixing trace minerals into the water to alter its freezing point, or layering ash between sheets for better insulation. It's not widely accepted, but the idea is charming, chemists with sandals and a dream. The wind shifts, and with it comes the smell, faint but distinct. Cold earth, clay, and something floral, maybe jasmine from a nearby garden. The contrast with the dry heat around you is stark. You find yourself wondering how people first stumbled onto this. Maybe someone left a bucket out overnight and came back to find it crusted in frost. Maybe they saw potential. Maybe someone else saw profit. Or maybe, like most human advancements, it happened slowly, awkwardly with a lot of mess and not a single moment of brilliance. But dozens of tiny ones. The important part? They paid attention. You lean back against the wall, feeling the sun creep up your legs like it's reclaiming territory. This ice field isn't working today, of course, it's too warm. But the energy of it lingers. You can almost hear the slap of wooden soles on packed dirt. The hush of voices moving around you in the dark, sharing rumors and laughter while waiting for water to harden. And then, the harvest. It wasn't like chopping trees or shearing sheep. Ice was delicate. You couldn't grab it, you had to court it. You had to know when to lift and how to carry. Too fast and you shattered it. Too slow and it melted. And once it was shaped, you had to protect it. From the heat, from thieves, from occasionally jealous neighbors who hadn't gotten theirs. In fact, a preserved letter from a Zoroastrian merchant in the 4th century CE complains about ice disputes between families, particularly over accusations of cutting too early or watering the channel unfairly. Ice, it turns out, had politics. You smirk. Of course it did. There's something deeply human about turning frozen water into a social minefield. And yet, despite the pettiness, the awkwardness, and the sheer labor, people did it. Every year. For generations. Because when the world turns to fire, cold becomes treasure. Not luxury, not novelty. Treasure. The old man taps the hook staff against the ground once, just once, and turns away, leaving you to follow the ghost of the harvest trail back toward the Yakshal. But instead of going inside again, he veers left toward what looks like an alley of shadows flanked by thick, windowless walls. You hesitate. It looks quiet in the way that feels watched. This way, he says over his shoulder. You follow. The alley opens up into a small courtyard. Not grand, not ceremonial. More like a utility space. There's no tile, no fountains, no gold leaf. Just function. And above you, protruding from the nearby buildings like periscopes for buildings that never learn to lie flat, are wind catchers. Tall, narrow, symmetrical. Like giant chimneys with secrets. You've seen towers before. Minarets, bell towers. But these feel different. These aren't about visibility, they're about air. The old man points upward. Bad gears, he says. The Persian word for wind catchers. Literally, wind grabbers. You squint at the structure. It's open at the top, slotted on all sides with vents. There's a strange intelligence to the design, like it's listening for something you can't hear. How does it work, you ask. He smiles, shrugs. You'll feel it. And then you do. A breeze, just a whisper but real, floats down the shaft and brushes past your face. Not hot. Not scalded wind like what you trudged through earlier. Cool. You inhale sharply. There's no machinery, no fan. Just gravity, geometry, and the wind's willingness to be redirected. The secret, he tells you, is pressure. The tall structure captures air from above, channels it downward into the building, and vents hot air back out. Some systems even have a small pool of water at the bottom, so that as air passes over it, it cools further. A primitive but shockingly effective form of evaporative cooling. Historians still argue whether wind catchers were designed purely for comfort, or whether they served religious and ritualistic functions too. Was cool air just a necessity or a divine right? After all, in Zoroastrianism, wind is a sacred element, a breath of Ahura Mazda himself. Designing a building that collaborates with wind might not just be science, it might be reverence. You sit beneath the tower, letting the breeze stroke your neck. In some places, these bachers were connected directly to yakchals. Cooling air flowed into the chamber, slowing melt. Other times they were used in homes. Elite ones, of course, where having a natural air conditioner marked your status as someone who didn't sweat in public. But the real magic is that they worked. They still work. Modern architects have studied these towers with slack jaws, realizing that with the right design, you can reduce internal building temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, with no electricity at all. A quirky footnote? There's a record of a merchant in 12th century Yazd who refused to live in a house without a wind catcher. He considered them as essential as a roof. And honestly, sitting here with the breeze gently untangling the sweat from your scalp, you can't blame him. You glance around and notice other people stepping into the courtyard. Some with clay pitchers, others with wet cloths. One woman is balancing what looks like a basket of fresh herbs. She pauses under the wind catcher, lifts a handful of mint to her nose, and closes her eyes. Even smells are cooler here. You look up again. The Badyr cuts a sharp silhouette against the sky, proud and quiet. And yet there's nothing flashy about it. It doesn't hum, buzz, or glow. It doesn't blink when it's on. It just exists. With perfect timing, catching what the world offers, redirecting it, sharing it. And maybe that's why you're beginning to fall in love with ancient Persian design. Because nothing here fights nature. It works with it. Heat is a given, not an enemy. Cold is not a demand, but a gift coaxed through patience. You think back to your own place. A sea unit's rattling, fans whirring like confused helicopters, all of it loud and artificial and overbearing. Here, the buildings breathe. A soft voice beside you. Would you like to see where the air goes next? You turn. A younger man now, maybe a student, smiles at you. His eyes are bright, amused by your visible awe. Sure, you say, and follow him around a bend. He shows you a small chamber with low ceilings, thick walls, and several narrow slits on opposite ends. This is the retreat room, he explains. You sit here, you drink something cold. You forget your name for a while. You smile. Sounds ideal. He steps inside and claps his hands once. The sound is muffled, absorbed instantly by the sarouge-coated walls. The room is built to shrink sound as well as temperature. Nothing echoes. Even thoughts go quiet here. You sit cross-legged on a cool stone platform, and for a moment, you feel like something ancient. A monk, maybe. Or just someone who understands now what it means to be still. In the quiet, you let your thoughts swirl like wind in a tower. Everything you've seen so far, the yakchal, the ice basin, the wind catchers, it's not just survival, it's style. Persian engineering doesn't force solutions, it invites them. And here in the retreat room, as you feel another gentle draft roll past your neck, you finally start to cool from the inside out. You linger a little longer in the retreat room, tracing the pattern of light across the floor as it filters through the slit in the wall. The air here seems to think before it moves, settling, waiting, then shifting gently again. Eventually, the younger man returns with a cup in hand. It's glazed ceramic, simple, curved perfectly to your palm. Inside? Something cold. You take a sip. It's sweet, floral, and somehow frosty. Rosewater, maybe. A hint of honey. A few crushed herbs float lazily at the surface. It's not just refreshing, it's ceremonial. You set the cup down slowly, the chill still blooming behind your teeth. "You're ready," he says. Ready for what? You follow him back out through the courtyard, past the bad gear towers and the retreat room, back toward the Yakshal. But instead of entering the domed storage space again, he leads you around the back, toward the invisible half of the structure. Underground. You didn't think about it before, but of course it goes deeper. These aren't just surface-level innovations. They descend. The ground dips suddenly, and a narrow, shaded stairway leads down into darkness. The steps are carved from packed earth, worn smooth by centuries of sandals and second thoughts. As you descend, the temperature drops, not dramatically, but steadily, like falling into sleep. Down here, beneath the towering dome, is where the real preservation happens. You step into a chamber so quiet it seems to hold its breath. It's dark, save for thin shafts of light filtered through cracks and purpose-built slits high above. The air is cool, still, and slightly damp. There's no furniture, no signs, just space. And silence. "This," the man says, "is the heart." He doesn't mean metaphorically. This is the inner sanctum of the Yakshal, the part no one sees unless they're trusted or trained or just stubborn enough to follow the scent of curiosity into a hole. Here, ancient Persians stored more than ice. They stored time. Layered into the earth are pits, deep enough to hold hundreds of kilos of ice, food, or perishables. On the walls, hooks for baskets. In one corner, what appears to be an old drainage channel, now dry. And high above, that same vented shaft you saw earlier from the outside, like the throat of a giant, breathing cold down from the sky. You lean over one of the pits, peering into its depths. It's empty now, but you can imagine it. Blocks of ice wrapped in straw, tucked in like babies in a communal cradle. The straw serves two purposes: insulation and spacing. It slows the melt, keeps the blocks from fusing into a single icy slab of doom. Historians still argue whether these lower chambers were used exclusively for ice, or if they also stored things like dairy, pickled vegetables, even documents. One curious report from the 11th century mentions, "Ice-dampened ink kept supple for decree writing," a phrase that sounds suspiciously like someone just trying to sound important. But who are we to judge? The younger man walks over to a wall and taps it lightly. "Sarouge," he says again, smiling. "Like breathing clay." You run your hand along it. It's smoother than you expect. Cool to the touch. Someone long ago mixed this from scratch. Lime, ash, clay, and egg white, then spread it with practiced hands. You wonder how many layers are hidden beneath your fingers. How many summers it survived. How many winters it prepared for. A quirky little tale you've read resurfaces. There was once a family in Shiraz who held a first ice festival every year, celebrating the first successful harvest of ice with music, honey-drizzled dates, and slightly chaotic dancing. The Yakshal was decorated with flower garlands, and children would be allowed to touch a chunk of ice just briefly, before it was whisked away to the deeper chambers. You wonder if they knew what they were celebrating. Because down here in the silence, it becomes obvious. This isn't just like storage. This is devotion. You sit on the edge of a pit and close your eyes. It's not just the temperature that's cooler down here. It's the time. Everything slows. You can almost hear echoes of centuries. Sandal footsteps, murmured prayers, the soft thud of a block being set gently in place. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Above, a faint draft filters in from the shaft, brushing your cheek like the whisper of a grandmother's lullaby. There's something poetic about the way it all comes together. Surface work begins with the ice harvest. It's layered in with care, then it's moved, carried by basket, cart, or palm, down into the belly of the structure. Stored, monitored, protected. And when the summer months arrive like a slow-moving inferno, someone climbs down here again. They select a block. They brush off the straw. They lift it up, not quickly, not casually, but with intention. You don't just use ice, you honor it. In a world where heat is constant and shade is currency, the act of preservation becomes almost sacred. And here in the cool silence of this earth-walled womb, you understand why. Because this is a place that says, we will not let the fire win. We will take what little cold the world offers and make it last. You emerge slowly from the Yakchal's belly, blinking against the brightness like someone returning from a long dream. The air outside feels different now. Not hotter, just more aware. You're sweating again, of course, but even the sweat feels earned. Underfoot, the sand crunches softly, and in the distance, bells chime from a caravan threading its way toward the city gates. But you're not headed toward the market or the mosque. You're following a narrow footpath that hugs the outer wall of the city, where orchards thin and silence thickens. Your guide has changed again. A teenage boy with a crooked smile and an enthusiasm that suggests he's either a local history buff or just deeply amused by your confusion. He's leading you to the ice fields. But not the ones you've seen already. Not the shallow freezing basins. These are something else. Hidden behind a set of old garden walls and shaded by rows of tamarisk trees, you find them. Wide, flat spaces bordered by low canals and surrounded by low storage huts. You arrive just as twilight begins to stretch its fingers across the earth. A crescent moon rises like a hook snagging the first stars. The boy gestures for you to crouch near the edge of one basin. He dips a ladle into a half-full channel and splashes a bit of water across the clay surface. "Tonight is right," he whispers, though it's not clear what exactly makes a night right. And then you see them. Workers. Dozens of them, appearing one by one like shadows peeling away from the earth. No one rushes. No one barks orders. This isn't a factory, it's a ceremony, a silent one. Men in robes and sandals, some with scarves wrapped tightly around their heads, begin pouring water gently into the basins. Measured, thin layers, no more than a few centimeters deep. Women arrive too, carrying bundles of straw, passing them out like sacred texts. You crouch low, almost afraid to move. Even your breath feels like it might disrupt something. The boy whispers, "First frost by midnight. If stars stay clear." You nod, as if you understand. Though, let's be honest, you're mostly just in awe. The ritual is mesmerizing. A few meters away, an older woman unrolls what looks like a woven mat of reeds and lays it beside one channel. It's not for decoration, it's for insulation. Others follow, unspooling mats, gently tucking straw around the basins, adjusting water levels by dipping out the excess with gourd ladles. Every movement feels practiced, inherited. This isn't trial and error anymore, this is tradition. Historians still argue whether ice-making nights like this were common in every Persian city, or limited to regions like Yazd where desert nights were cold enough. Some sources suggest competition between neighborhoods, who could gather more ice, who could keep it longer, who lost the least to early melts. Other accounts mention communal harvest days, entire quarters gathering to scrape and stack before the sun reclaimed its prize. But none of that matters right now, because you are watching the moonlit ballet of the ice makers. A quirky note catches your eye. One boy, maybe 8 years old, is holding a small wooden paddle carved with stars. He waves it slowly over the basin he's guarding. Not to stir the water, not to scare birds. Just a ritual. The kind you invent when you're too young to lift buckets but still want to be part of the magic. You smile. He winks at you. A breeze rolls in. Cool, not cold, but promising. The water across the basin shivers ever so slightly like it's preparing to sleep. And then, as if by cue, the group collectively steps back. No signal, no shout. Just a felt moment. The night is officially cold enough. The freeze has begun. Someone hums. A low, melodic line with no lyrics. It fades as quickly as it came. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just habit. You remain still, watching condensation form along the edges of the shallow pools, watching as the desert finally cooperates. You hadn't thought it was capable of generosity, but here it is, offering just enough chill to feed a community for months. And they're ready to catch it. There's something deeply moving about how quiet it all is. No machinery, no countdowns. Just patience, ritual, and the unspoken agreement between the people and their land. We'll wait for the cold, and we'll treat it gently when it comes. You lean your elbows against your knees, and for a long moment, time slows to a trickle. You don't know how long you sit there, but eventually your guide places a soft hand on your shoulder. "Come," he says. "The cutting comes before dawn. Now we rest." And you realize there's a rhythm to this too. Make the ice, let it settle. Cut before the sun. Store before the melt, a cadence of survival. You stand stretching your legs. The basins shimmer faintly under the stars now, already reflecting a thin glaze. And somewhere nearby, a rooster, too ambitious, crows once. Too early. But not entirely wrong. Because in this world of hot days and cold intentions, timing is everything. And those who master it, master the ice. You wake before the sun, guided not by alarms or crows, but by the sound of soft scraping. Gentle, rhythmic. Like sand being brushed from stone or the first combing of a horse's mane. You sit up, breath hanging in the crisp air, and realize the boy was right. Tonight was right. The frost has come. You make your way back to the basin, steps muffled by dew-hardened ground. The scene before you is nothing short of reverent. A dozen workers move in synchronized silence, crouched over the shallow pools, sliding long-handled scrapers beneath the thin sheets of ice. No one speaks, no one dares. The noise of the world has no place here. Each motion is precise. The tools, flat-bladed, wooden, glide just beneath the surface, loosening perfect panes of ice like someone peeling memory from glass. And still, the stars linger. The horizon has only begun to bleed light, and the desert holds its breath. You crouch beside a man with a wide-brimmed cap and a beard so perfectly frosted it seems intentional. He doesn't acknowledge you, but he doesn't mind you either. He gestures toward the ice with the tip of his scraper. You reach down to touch a slab, surprised at its weight. It's not thick, barely the width of a finger, but it's firm. Real. Cold that can be held. You lift it carefully, hands shaking not from chill, but from something quieter. Awe? The man gives a small nod of approval. The harvested ice is laid into straw-lined baskets and covered immediately. The workers move with quiet urgency. Efficient but unhurried. There's no rushing the sun, but there's no wasting a second of darkness either. The ice must be hidden before dawn fully arrives. You follow them as they move toward the storage path. Yes, that path. The one that leads back to the Yakchal's deep chambers. But instead of going all the way down, they stop in an intermediate room. A platform of stone, cool and slightly concave, awaits each load. Here, the blocks are sorted. Some are wrapped immediately in cloth or fresh straw. Others are marked literally with small smudges of dye or burned symbols. A kind of cold ledger, only the initiated can read. Historians still argue what these marks meant. Were they family symbols, temperature indicators, or simply a way to reserve the best pieces for weddings, funerals, or sacred festivals? One theory suggests that the best slabs were chosen not for their size, but for their clarity. Ice so pure it rang like a bell when struck. You test that now, tapping your knuckle gently on a thicker sheet. It doesn't ring exactly, but there's a satisfying tone. A muted hum, like touching a secret too long buried. The old man, yes, that old man, appears again, this time carrying a curved metal chisel and a small wooden mallet. He demonstrates a careful cut along the ice's grain, splitting it clean in half without a sound. He sets one piece aside and offers you the other. It's smaller, triangular, and melts immediately against your fingers. You press it to your lips, cold, sharp, still. And somehow, despite everything, refreshing. Nearby, two workers lift a larger block between them using a sling made of rope and leather. They move together like dancers, backs in perfect sync, steps evenly spaced. You ask quietly, "How do you decide who gets what?" The boy from earlier answers, now at your side again. "We don't. The families keep count. The neighbors know." "But you don't know lock, no guards?" He laughs softly. "There are rules older than locks." A quirky local tale surfaces, one you read in a footnote somewhere. During a particularly hot season in the 1600s, a known trickster named Parviz snuck into a yachtchal late at night and swapped his smaller ice load with that of a neighboring merchant. But the next day, every neighbor knew. Not because of evidence, but because the merchant's daughter's sherbet tasted too watery. And that, apparently, was proof enough to curse a family line for 7 generations. Justice, Persian style. The workers continue. Slab after slab, the chamber fills with layered ice, padded and protected. The temperature dips further, and you realize the space is working as intended. With each block placed, the room cools. With each exit, the warmth is shut out. It's like watching the body gather its breath for the months ahead. By the time the sun touches the roofline, the last slab is sealed beneath straw and linen. The door is closed, not locked, and someone scratches a symbol into the lintel above it. Just one curved line with a dot. A record, you assume. Or maybe a prayer. And then it's over. The workers disperse, not with celebration, but with quiet satisfaction. No one claps, no one shouts. There is no festival. The ice is safe. That's enough. You remain behind a moment longer, letting the coolness settle into your clothes. One final breath before rejoining the fire-colored world outside. Because in a few hours, the temperature will climb again. The walls will bake. The breeze will sleep. But down here in this place carved by patience and held together by straw and silence, the cold will endure. Because someone woke before dawn to claim it. By midday, the streets of Yazd ripple with heat. You can see it rising in ghostly waves from the stone, blurring the distance between buildings, bending time just slightly. Somewhere, a dog barks once and immediately regrets the effort. Even the pigeons, normally so fond of rooftops, have retreated to alley shade. And yet, here you are. You're sitting on a shaded stoop, sipping cool water from a copper cup that sweats in your hand. Yes, cool. Not ice cold like before, but cooler than anything outside dares to be. And that right now feels like decadence. The water came from storage, not from the yachtchal's main chamber, but from a smaller domestic pit built beside a home's foundation. Your host, a widow named Merun, explains that this is common practice. Big ice is for everyone, she says. Small coolness, this is personal. She lifts a clay jug from the shadowed nook beside her feet and pours more water for you. We used to keep melon in here too, she adds, smiling. But my son eats it before it cools. The cup fogs again. You take another sip and feel the afternoon pause. This is where the ice ends up, not in courts or palaces, though it does get there too, but in homes like this. Small courtyards, shaded corners, intimate spaces. Coldness not for show but for comfort, and often for healing. Historians still argue whether Persian ice was reserved mostly for the elite or if it trickled more democratically through society. The official records lean toward nobles and royals. Documents listing ice deliveries to summer palaces, sherbets served at coronations, chilled compresses applied to weary viziers. But the oral traditions? They're quieter, more generous. They speak of midwives using ice to cool cloths during difficult births, of mothers keeping dates chilled to ease teething pain. Mayroon taps her knuckles on the jug. In the old days, we'd wrap fig leaves around the outside, kept it cooler. You smile. It's the kind of tip no engineer ever thinks to document. And then she gestures to the corner of the courtyard where her daughter is carefully folding something pale and gauzy. A funeral cloth. The last time I used real ice, Mayroon says softly, was when my father died. We placed a slab on his chest. It helped keep him peaceful. You nod, not sure what to say. The daughter folds the cloth again, more slowly this time. You hadn't considered that before. Cold as a way to mourn. Not just preservation, but transition. Giving the family more time, more stillness, more space to grieve before the inevitable march of the sun returned. A fringe anecdote surfaces. A traveling Spanish trader in the 15th century wrote of seeing a Persian procession where women carried bowls of ice alongside the funeral bier, not to cool the body, but to show the heavens their grief had weight. You wonder if it's true. You hope so. In the corner, Mayroon's son reappears with a bowl of fruit, grapes mostly, and something green that might be unripe fig or might be the desert's idea of a joke. He offers you one with a grin. It's surprisingly sweet. They were kept near the Yakchal yesterday, he boasts. Of course they were. A moment later, the boy runs off to chase shadows, leaving the bowl beside you. You glance at the grapes, imagining their journey. Not shipped, not trucked, but tended, picked, cooled, served. Each step held with care. You take another grape and let it sit on your tongue. The heat of the courtyard evaporates slightly. Not gone, but negotiated. Across the way, an elderly neighbor leans from her window and calls out something you don't catch. Mayroon replies with a simple phrase and waves. You ask what she said. She's asking if we're sharing ice tomorrow, Mayroon replies. Her son is getting married. You raise your eyebrows. Ice for a wedding? She grins. Of course, what kind of wedding has only sweat? And just like that, a new picture forms. Not the technical marvel of the Yakchal, not the silent labor of midnight harvests, but this, a courtyard filled with color, copper trays of sherbet shimmering with frost, guests dabbing their foreheads with chilled cloths, children laughing as they chase each other past bowls of half-melted slush. A celebration where cold is not just relief, it's a gift. And suddenly you understand something deeper. All this work, the scraping, the storing, the sealing and venting and layering of straw, it wasn't just about survival. It was about moments. Creating a soft place inside the hard heat. Making sure that when joy or grief or sickness came, there was space for it. Space held by cold. Mayroon touches your hand gently. You'll join us, yes? You nod before the words even reach your mouth. Because honestly, where else would you be? You leave Mayroon's courtyard that evening full of cold water, warm fruit, and an emotion you can't quite name. It isn't awe exactly, something quieter. A kind of humble respect. Not just for ice, but for those who coaxed it out of the desert and then decided to share it. The boy from earlier catches up to you just outside the gate. He's barefoot now and holding a small clay oil lamp flickering softly. Come, he says. You haven't seen the Qanat yet. You blink. You've heard the word before. Something to do with water, he nods, reading your thoughts. Not the flashiest part, he admits, but maybe the most important. You follow him out of town, past where the structure's thin and fields stretch like tired limbs. The wind has picked up again, not cold, but finally less aggressive. Crickets begin their nightly sermon, and the sky swells with stars. The boy stops at what looks like a narrow well. Nothing fancy, just a circle of worn stone surrounded by 3 squat trees. But when he lifts the cover and gestures for you to look down, you feel it. A pulse of cooler air. faint, but real, like breathing through the nose of the earth. This is one mouth of the Qanat, he says. She stretches for miles, maybe more. You stare down into the dark. At first, there's nothing. Then a shimmer. Moving water, slow, steady, and impossibly ancient. Qanats are underground channels, sloped gently over miles, that bring fresh water from distant mountain aquifers to cities and farms. Dug entirely by hand, measured with rope, plumb lines, and experience. They are, quite literally, rivers beneath deserts. You walk with the boy to the next mouth, another vertical shaft, spaced a few hundred meters from the last. Then another, like the vertebrae of a buried dragon. And along the path you begin to realize the Yakchal couldn't exist without these. The water in the basins, supplied by Qanat. The air cooled in Badgirs, made denser by Qanat moisture. Even the household jars of cool water in Maroon's home, fed by this silent, flowing infrastructure. Historians still argue whether the concept was born in Persia or borrowed from earlier civilizations like the Babylonians. What most agree on is that Persia perfected it. The slope had to be precise. Too steep, and erosion destroyed it. Too flat, and the water stalled. Workers had to dig vertical shafts for ventilation, access, and waste removal, all while underground. Without GPS, without calculators. Just stars, shadows, and sweat. The boy sits on a rock beside one shaft and grins at you. My grandfather helped clear one once, he says. He said it was like crawling through a living map. You ask if anyone still digs new Qanats today. Some try, he shrugs. But the old ones still work. If you listen, you can hear them breathing. You kneel beside the stone ring and close your eyes. There it is, a low, echoing hush. The whisper of water moving across time. Not roaring, not shouting, just flowing, dependable, essential. A quirky tidbit pops into your head. Didn't you read once that Alexander the Great tried to map Persia's Qanats and failed? His generals couldn't understand how an entire civilization ran on invisible plumbing. One commander reportedly claimed, "Their rivers vanish like magic." The Persians, for their part, found this hilarious. The boy interrupts your thoughts. Some people say each Qanat has a spirit, he says. Not like a ghost. More like a guardian. You thank her when she gives. You apologize when she floods. You nod. You understand. This isn't just engineering, it's intimacy. Because to live in the desert, you don't fight it. You collaborate. You walk a little farther and come across what looks like a small hut, no bigger than a garden shed. Inside, a covered trough gently bubbles. The boy dips a ladle and hands it to you. Direct, he says. The water is cold, clean, sharper than you expect. You drink slowly the way you would taste wine, and somewhere between the third and fourth sip, it hits you. This water has been underground for centuries. It traveled miles through darkness. It didn't rush. It arrived calmly, like everything in this place. You lean against the doorframe of the hut and watch the moonlight silver the stones. The boy hums something tuneless, tapping his lamp gently against his palm. You think about all the systems you've seen so far. The Yakchal, the wind catchers, the freezing pools. Each remarkable, each beautiful. But this silent underground river, this is the spine of it all. It doesn't gleam. It doesn't rise against the skyline. But it moves. Always. Patient, unseen, and essential. And perhaps the most Persian invention of them all. The next morning, you're back in the city, seated cross-legged in the shaded inner courtyard of a family home, where the scent of simmering cardamom rises from a low brazier. You're sipping something warm this time, because even in the desert, mornings can bite if you've been walking alongside underground water all night. Across from you sits a woman in a soft blue robe, expertly folding linen napkins into delicate triangles. Her fingers move with precision that suggests this isn't her first morning chore. "These are for the sherbet cups," she explains without looking up. "The ice comes later." You blink. Of course. Today's event, a wedding. Not yours, don't panic, but someone else's daughter is getting married this afternoon and the neighborhood is alive with purpose. Pots bang, spices fly, children laugh with too much sugar already in their systems. And through it all, one thread remains unbroken. The ice is coming. You're starting to understand its rhythm. In a shaded annex, two boys are wrapping cloths around shallow clay bowls, desert chillers for rosewater drinks. Across the courtyard, someone is stacking fig-stuffed pastries on a tray that rests on a bed of damp straw, slowly cooling. The ice won't arrive until just before the ceremony. Why waste it early? The bride's grandmother tells you this with a wink. The groom can sweat, she says, but her sherbet must not. The whole day unfolds around this quiet pact. Cold is precious, and its presence must be timed like poetry. You help for a while, polishing cups, arranging fruits, laughing when someone accidentally flings a melon slice into the mint. But your attention keeps drifting back to the rituals of cooling. It's not just about preservation anymore, it's about performance. When the ice finally arrives, carried in linen, nestled like treasure, there is no announcement, just a hum of approval. The slab is placed in a clay tub in the center of the courtyard, and the air changes. You feel it on your arms. The temperature drops a whisper, and suddenly everyone has something cold in their hands. The sherbet, a mixture of rosewater, saffron, a squeeze of lime, and just enough syrup to make your teeth feel indulgent, tastes like the kind of luxury that once started wars. It's poured over crushed ice, and the resulting chill jolts your senses in the gentlest possible way. You close your eyes and sip slowly. Across the courtyard, the bride appears. Dressed in layers of white and gold, henna dark on her fingers. She smiles, bows, and accepts a cup. Her fingers leave slight condensation on the side, and for a brief moment, time slows. This is what the ice was for. Not just survival. Symbol. Celebration. Suspended time. A small boy darts past you with a linen-wrapped ball of snow-colored slush. "It's for the old ones," he shouts, running toward a cluster of elderly guests under the fig tree. There, the ice is being rubbed onto the backs of hands, the napes of necks, the thin skin at temples. Not for refreshment, but comfort. A hush settles over the group as they touch the cold like a memory. Some of them close their eyes. Historians still debate the depth of domestic ice use in ancient Persia. Official records focus on royalty, iced rose syrups at banquets, snow imported from distant mountains. But within these courtyard walls, the story breathes differently. Ice as an equalizer. Not every day, not for everyone. But when it arrived, it was shared. You hear a woman mention a marriage contract clause from a neighboring town where the groom promised to provide summer ice at least twice per season. She laughs as she says it, but the pride in her voice is real. A quirky folktale is recited nearby by an uncle with too much date syrup on his fingers. In it, a poor man falls in love with a noble's daughter. Her dowry? Not gold, not camels. A room cooled by ice every day for a year. He spends the summer building his own yakshal with nothing but stubbornness and a mule named Narmi. By the time winter comes, he's collected just enough frozen puddle water to cool a single basin. She marries him anyway. Everyone laughs at the punchline. Because only a fool builds cold with love. But they all seem to agree that the fool had the right idea. As the evening deepens, the courtyard glows with lanterns. The ice has begun to melt, but it does so slowly, like a guest who knows not to overstay. In the center, the bride and groom sip the last of their sherbet, cheeks flushed not from heat, but from dancing. You sit back, the bowl cool in your hands, and you begin to realize every society has its rituals, but here, coolness is culture. ice is not just frozen water. It's reputation, hospitality, timing, tact. It's knowing when to chill the drink and when to let it warm in your hand. When to serve, when to withhold. And always, always to do it quietly. You let your eyes close just for a moment. The night's soft around you. The wedding hums, and the ice melts. On purpose. The next day, you find yourself in the outer quarters of the city. The part where homes are flatter, doors lower, and rooftops wide enough to sleep on when the summer heat won't loosen its grip. This is the place of market folk and craftsmen, where cooling off isn't about rosewater sherbets or shaded courtyards, but about not passing out in the midday sun. Your new guide is a tanner's apprentice named Shafiq. He has ink on his fingers, a sly grin, and a talent for navigating side streets without ever stepping into the light. "You've seen how the rich cool down," he says. "Time to meet the rest of us." He's not bitter exactly, just honest. You follow him past bundles of leather soaking in brine, past a narrow dye house that smells like vinegar and smoke, and finally to a shaded stall where two women are preparing what looks like pickled vegetables. Cooling foods meant to balance the heat in the body. "You think the ice is the only secret?" One of them laughs. "We've been cooling down since before the first yakchal was a lump of clay." She hands you a slice of cucumber, dipped in a mixture of vinegar and mint. It's shockingly refreshing, tangy, crisp, and just cool enough to make your scalp tingle. Shafiq explains as you chew, "Most of us only get ice on festival days, but we've got tricks." And what tricks they are. He takes you to a weaver's hut where water-soaked linen sheets are hung across shaded windows. As the breeze moves through them, it cools, evaporative magic at its simplest. Inside, the room is at least 5 degrees cooler than outside. You see clay jars, zir jars as they're called, lined up in niches, their surfaces damp. Water slowly seeps through the porous walls and evaporates, chilling the contents within. It's not fast and it's not dramatic, but it works. Historians still argue whether the use of these clay coolers predated yakchals or developed alongside them. Rural innovation mirroring urban engineering. What's clear, though, is that nearly every household had one, and they were often passed down like heirlooms. You run your hand across one of the jars. It hums with quiet coolness, the kind that doesn't call attention to itself. Inside is water, yes, but sometimes milk, yogurt, or even cooked rice being kept just on the edge of spoilage. A quirky story emerges from a butcher you meet in the square. He claims his grandfather once tried to build a personal yakchal in their courtyard, using nothing but bricks, clay, and a large ceramic bathtub. "It worked," he insists, "for 2 weeks. Then the cat fell in." You choose not to ask about the cat, but the idea sticks. Even those without access to Grand Dome and city-funded harvests found ways to cool. Not as luxury, but as necessity, as ingenuity, as pride. You pass a line of stalls selling dried fruits, cooling herbs, and bundles of second-jibin syrup made from vinegar, sugar, and mint. People buy it by the bottle, add it to water, and swear by its ability to chase the sun from their bones. Later, you find yourself sitting under a grapevine trellis, the dappled light casting moving shadows across the packed earth. Someone hands you a slushy-like dessert, shaved ice, yes, real ice, packed into a metal cup, drizzled with saffron syrup. The ice, it turns out, came from a neighbor who had bartered for a small slab during the wedding last night. You sip it slowly, grains of ice melting on your tongue like snowflakes with ambition, and you begin to notice something. In this part of town, ice is currency, not in coins or weights, in favors, in moments. You trade for it, you earn it, you use it well. You ask Shafiq, what happens if someone wastes ice? He raises an eyebrow. They wouldn't. And it's not a threat, it's just a truth. Because here, everyone remembers what it takes to make cold in a place built for heat. Every block of ice carries the weight of labor, timing, silence. Wasting it is like tearing a page from a sacred book. You lean back, cold cup in hand, the trellis creaking gently in the wind. And it dawns on you. Cooling isn't just a technology in Persia. It's a language. One spoken in clay jars and soaked fabrics, in shared slush and mint syrup, in the way an old woman dabs a cool cloth behind her knees and a child knows not to ask for a second scoop unless there's enough to go around. And though the yakchals are the monuments, these corners, the alleys, the jars, the quiet shade, are the culture. This is where the cold becomes human, where it becomes kind, where it becomes home. The sun is lower now, casting long golden fingers across the rooftops as you wander through one of Yazd's quieter districts. The streets here aren't deserted, but they move slower. Children nap in hammocks, cats stretch into puddles of shade, and even the breeze seems to tiptoe. You round a corner and find yourself in front of an old school, wooden shutters, faded murals, and a courtyard filled with chalk lines and forgotten sandals. But today it's empty, except for a teacher sitting cross-legged under a fig tree, reading from a weathered scroll. He looks up. "You want to hear a poem about ice?" he asks, not waiting for an answer. You sit. He clears his throat and begins to recite. It's a short verse, maybe 5 lines, but it lingers. Something about snow being the dream of fire, about cold carrying memory, about how water holds its breath when it freezes, as if listening. You don't catch every word, but you feel all of it. Ice in Persian poetry is no accident. It appears everywhere, symbolic, sacred, sometimes playful. One 14th century mystic compared divine love to a melting cube in the hand, fleeting, messy, worth the stickiness. Another wrote of a king who preserved letters in blocks of ice. So only the patient may read. Historians still debate whether these verses were rooted in real experience or metaphorical invention. But ask anyone here and they'll tell you. Ice teaches you things. About impermanence. About timing. About beauty that refuses to last. Your teacher smiles and unfurls another scroll, this one more ornate. "Let me show you something strange," he says. He reads a fragment of a folk epic, where a sorcerer traps summer in a block of ice, burying it beneath a yakchal to stop time. It doesn't work, of course, nothing can hold a season hostage, but the attempt? That's the point. You ask, was that a myth? He shrugs. Isn't everything? And then he tells you about the ice lion. It was said that in Shiraz, once every few years, the elders would sculpt a lion out of the largest ice slab harvested that season. Its eyes were made of crushed garnet, its mane carved in such detail that even flies refused to land. The lion would sit in the town square until it melted, one paw falling, then the nose, then the tail. And when the last drop vanished, the city would host a feast. A way of saying, we can't keep what's beautiful, but we can remember it well. You sit with that image a long while. Eventually, the teacher stands. "Come," he says. "One more story. This one's real." Maybe. He leads you past the school through a low doorway into what looks like a private study. On a shelf, tucked between dusty books, sits a jar of melted ice, sealed tight, labeled in delicate ink. "What is it?" you ask. He chuckles. A scholar once tried to preserve the last ice block from the old Shah's yakchal. It melted, of course, but he kept the water. Why? To remember it was once something else. You stare at the jar. It's unremarkable, just water now. But knowing its origin gives it weight. Not scientifically, emotionally. Because it's not about the temperature, it's about the transformation. A quirky fact springs to mind. An 18th century Persian alchemist tried to freeze wine in a yakchal, believing it would purify the soul. It didn't work. The wine stayed wine. But the idea stuck. That cold clarifies, that cold reveals. And here in this room full of scrolls and jars and fading ink, you start to feel it too. Ice isn't just a miracle in the desert, it's a mirror. It reflects who you are when you're patient, when you plan, when you respect what's rare. You walk back out into the courtyard as the last light leans across the fig leaves. A breeze passes through, soft, unexpected, almost shy. You look up. Somewhere in the distance, a wind catcher exhales. And below, this quiet corner of the world breathes in. That night, you stay in a guest house near the old wall of the city, a modest place with thick adobe walls, a stone floor that still remembers the day's heat, and a small cup of cold water waiting by the bedside. You lie on a thin mattress listening to the creak of the ceiling beams and the soft thrum of silence outside. But your mind doesn't rest. Because as wondrous as this all has been, the sherbets, the straw-lined slabs, the songs and stories, something has been nudging at the back of your thoughts. What happened when others wanted the cold too? You ask your host the next morning over a breakfast of yogurt, honey, and warm flatbread. She smiles the way people do when you finally ask the question they've been waiting to answer. "Ah," she says, "that's the part of the story that's never printed." And then she tells you about the ice spies. No, really. She tells you about whispers from the West, envoys and emissaries from other empires who marveled at Persian cooling systems and returned home with, let's just say, detailed sketches. One of the earliest known cases, according to her, was a Byzantine guest who dined with a Shah and later tried to replicate a Yakchal using marble and mirrors. It didn't work, she adds, but the rumor did. Rumor, after all, is its own kind of power. Historians still argue whether these stories of ancient espionage were exaggerated, or if entire palace blueprints were truly smuggled across borders by merchants with silk in one hand and stolen scrolls in the other. Some claim Chinese engineers studied Persian cooling principles during the Tang Dynasty, embedding similar airflow methods into ice houses. Others point to Mughal architecture, where grand structures cooled with channels and air towers that echoed the designs of Yazd. And then there were the Arab conquerors, who, after taking Persia, were so impressed with the Qanat system and ice preservation techniques that they adopted them wholesale. Within a century, cooling methods inspired by Persian designs appeared in Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba. You finish your bread slowly, because now you see it. This wasn't just a local miracle, it was an influence. A blueprint. A quiet kind of power that didn't conquer with fire or sword, but with shade, with breeze, with ice. A quirky document from a Baghdad poet surfaces in your memory. One where he thanks the mountainless snow of Persia for his wife's enduring affection during an especially scorching summer. You imagine the Yakchal's plans being redrawn, reinterpreted, sometimes misunderstood entirely. Imagine someone in Spain trying to build one without understanding the soil, the slope, the need for silence. Imagine a prince demanding ice in July and his servants panicking in heatstroke, whispering about Persian magic. And yet, some succeeded. A few desert cities managed to build structures that worked. Almost. Ice that stayed solid until noon. Wells that whispered cool air into tiled rooms. Not quite Yazd, but close enough to change a meal. Save a life or earn a smile from someone pouring tea. You find yourself back at the old Yakchal that evening, sitting under its shadow as stars blink awake overhead. The dome is quiet. Still. But somehow it feels less isolated now. It's not just a marvel, it's part of a network. A chain of cold passed across hands and hearts and hemispheres. You trace your fingers along the wall again. It doesn't hum, it doesn't glow, but it endures. And isn't that the real power? Not to dazzle, but to last. Not to fight the sun, but to outwait it. Somewhere nearby, the faint sound of a flute rises. A shepherd, maybe, or a student. Someone playing a tune older than the instruments that carry it. You close your eyes just for a moment and wonder how many empires ever truly understood the beauty of a cool moment. A sip of water? A bite of chilled fig? A breeze from a vent you can't see? Because while others chased glory and gold, the Persians built cool. And somehow, quietly, they won. Morning again, and you're not quite ready to leave. You wander the edges of Yazd, where the Yakchals stand like quiet giants, weathered by centuries but still upright, still casting those oddly sacred shadows. Some are still in use. Others, abandoned, have vines creeping up their sides and birds nesting in their vents. But they remain unmistakable. Symbols of a time when architecture was both prayer and practicality. You walk past one such crumbling structure, and for the first time on this journey, you feel something different. Loss. Because not all of them survived. Your guide today is a university student, arms full of notebooks and camera gear. He's researching vernacular engineering in arid regions, which is a fancy way of saying how people used to not die of heat stroke. He gestures to the cracked foundation of an old Yakchal. This one collapsed 5 years ago, he says. New road was built too close. Shifted the ground just enough. You stare at the wreckage. It looks like a broken teacup the size of a truck. But we're scanning it, he adds. Digital reconstruction, maybe a 3D print. You nod politely, but you know, it's not the same. Historians still argue whether these ancient structures should be restored, reconstructed, or simply remembered. Some say rebuilding them dishonors the original craftsmanship. Others argue that if it's forgotten, it's gone. A quirky story surfaces. A group of architecture students once attempted to build a modern Yakchal in Dubai. The shape was perfect, the material precise. But they forgot one thing: silence. The structure was placed next to a highway. The constant vibration ruined the ice harvest. You can copy the walls, that your guide says, but not the patience. That stays with you. You walk together for a while down paths less traveled until you arrive at something surprising. A new Yakchal. Not ancient, not cracked, not storied. New. It's being built by hand, community funded according to your guide, and based on the old models. Mud, straw, lime, and sweat. No cement, no shortcuts. Volunteers work in shifts. Older men teach the layering technique. Young women measure angles with knotted rope. You step closer. There's the dome again, rising carefully from a wide base like a breath being held. Wooden scaffolds curl around it like ribbons. It's not finished yet, but it feels alive. They plan to use it, your guide explains. Real ice. Real storage. But why, you ask? He pauses, shrugs. Because it worked. And there it is. No nostalgia, no branding, just function. Proof that what cooled the hands of a bride in the 12th century can still soothe a fever in the 2025. One of the volunteers waves you over and offers a small cup of cool water from the prototype basin nearby. The temperature isn't dramatic, but it's not warm, and more importantly, it didn't come from a machine. You sit on a stone and watch the workers for a long time. Somewhere nearby, someone drops a bucket. Laughter, a slap on the back. And you realize this isn't just about ice. It's about reconnection. In a world spinning faster than ever, here's a place choosing slow on purpose. Choosing to wait for the cold, to make it by hand, to keep it by design. The student beside you taps his notebook. This one will last, he says. You hope he's right. Because the truth is, we're not short on innovation these days. We can chill entire stadiums, pipe snow across cities, build freezers inside trucks that drive themselves. But none of it quite captures the grace of a structure built to whisper to wind and time. You take one last look at the new dome, the way it leans gently into the sky, not trying to dominate it, but to harmonize. It's not ancient, not yet. But give it time. You return one last time to the original Yakchal, the old one, the quiet one, the one that introduced you to all of this. It's early evening and the sky's the color of bruised fruit. The dome stands just as you left it, casting a long, bowed shadow across the packed earth. But this time, you're not just a visitor. You're carrying something. A small figure, wrapped in cloth. Cool since morning in a neighbor's cellar. You step inside the yakchal like it's a temple, which, in a way, it is. Your footsteps echo faintly against the curved walls. The light is dim, but you don't need to see much. You know the way. You walk slowly down the inner ramp, past where the straw used to be piled, past the empty pit, all the way to the base of the dome. You unwrap the fig. It's cool in your hand, soft but not mushy. Its skin is tight, like it's holding back a secret. You bite. And the sweetness is sudden. Not loud, not sugary, but deep. Like something that's waited. Like something that survived. And in that moment, you understand. This is not just about ice, it never was. It's about slowing down long enough to change the rhythm of your days. It's about designing for breath, for quiet, for cycles instead of sparks. It's about knowing that some things, the best things, can't be rushed. Historians will continue to debate how often ice was used, who had access, what materials insulated best. They'll argue over trade routes and labor structures and the degree to which wind catchers affected thermal equilibrium in desert homes. But you've been inside the silence. You've touched the walls that held summer at bay. You've tasted cold that started as nothing more than faith in the night. And the real lesson? Cold doesn't just cool you down. It teaches you to wait, to honor what takes time, to notice what melts, to appreciate the geometry of shade and the poetry of patience. A child's laugh floats in through the dome's upper vent. Somewhere nearby, someone is probably pouring sherbet over chipped ice. Somewhere else, an old woman is tying cloth over a jar of chilled yogurt. The world continues. But for now, here, you are still. And as the light shifts and the shadows stretch, you sit on the edge of the old storage pit and let the last bit of fig linger on your tongue. And now, here we are, still beneath the dome, still beside the echoes of 1,000 quiet harvests, where the desert once surrendered just enough night to make the cold stay a little longer. You're safe now. No rush. The yakshal will keep watch. Let your breathing slow, like wind slipping through a konad. Steady, silent, sure. The air cools behind your neck. Not much, just enough. Enough to remember that comfort doesn't have to be loud. That care can be carved into walls, that survival can be soft. Outside, the stars blink gently into being. You don't have to move. You don't have to solve. There's nothing here to chase. Only the steady architecture of presence. The patience of water waiting to freeze. The rhythm of those who built with their hands what their hearts already understood. Rest in that. Let your thoughts melt now, like the last sliver of morning ice beneath a fig tree. Nothing lost, only transformed. And as your eyelids grow heavy and the walls around you begin to blur into shadow, know this. You are part of that long breath now. Part of the hush. Part of the story of cold in a land that should have forgotten how to be kind. Sleep well, desert dreamer. You've learned how to keep the heat at bay, with nothing but silence, shadow, and time. Sweet dreams.